let's begin. In the absence of our treasurer, I would like board members to nominate and second someone, namely our finance chair, as our treasurer pro tem. Would somebody do the honors, please? So who's going to move?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Me, yes. Mr. Crosby?
Yes?
Mr. Lindy?
Do you ever want a break from this, Mr. Craig?
I'm good.
Okay, then yes.
Ms. Matt?
Yes.
No Dr. Moffitt. Vice President Weinberg?
Yes.
And President Bolton?
Present, thank you very much. Yes, oh, that's right, thank you. Roll call then for attendance.
Me, here. Mr. Crosby?
Here?
Mr. Lindy?
Here.
Ms. Matt?
Here.
Dr. Moffitt? Vice President Weinberg?
I am here.
And President Bolton?
Present again. I do want to say that Board Member Moffitt is attending a diversity panel at UC, and that's why she's absent today, and sends her best and sent some notes for us for our later discussions. Interim Superintendent, would you please introduce the first presentations?
Good day, everyone. I'm happy to start by sharing with you the CPS Project Management Plan. We want to share this as connected to the goals and guardrails in terms of how we are monitoring the work, managing the work, who has direct responsibility for some aspects of the work. And so, thank you, Rob, is going to pull that up. And I know a lot of people are like me and requested a hard copy of this. This will be a little challenging to copy. And as we walk through, I'll give you one example as an overview. I think you'll better be able to understand why that's a little challenging. So what we've done down the left-hand column of this document is listed each goal, each guardrail. And if Rob scrolls down, you'll see each of those goals and guardrails supported by our Board of Education. So those are all the way down the left-hand column. If we continue down that left-hand column to the bottom, I am going to explain to you right there, there are some additional aspects of the work the senior leadership and those closely related to the work of the senior leadership team are doing that we feel are also very important for us to monitor. And those things include culture, district growth, looking at our facilities, our district partnerships, all the way down to transportation. And we feel this way because although they're not called out specifically in any goal and guardrail, if you take transportation, for example, if we're not monitoring that, then we can't get the kids to and from school. And so then what's in the goals and guardrails becomes a little bit more challenging. So I'll ask Rob to scroll all the way back up to the top. And I'm going to use Director Campbell's work because we are specifically talking instructionally about goals and guardrails. So across the top, under the C column, you'll see action steps. We're looking at the date of the work, the implementation level, and of who's responsible, who's involved in the work, what level of support at the district we're providing to the schools, a status on each of those action steps, any updates or notes that we may need, something that may have been brought to our attention that was not necessarily involved in our initial thoughts, some of the roadblocks that we are coming up with that we must address rather quickly, any evidence of the work being done so that at the end of the day, we'll be able to say, this worked, this didn't work, this may need to be adjusted, this may need a little bit more monitoring. And so what we're doing is at the end of October, looking at baseline for some of the measures. We're going to also do a fall look. This is generally speaking after some of the interim testing takes place, and after we get third grade reading results for the fall, you'll see a winter status update, you'll see a spring status update, any materials and resources requested, and because we know that the board is always particularly interested in what things cost, we have a column to be able to put the cost of things. This will also help us as we begin the work around the 25-26 budget process. So each member, again, at the bottom, you have a series of names. Each member of the senior leadership team has a tab, and some of the friends, I say, of the senior leadership team. So, for example, let's pick a school-based person, Amy Randolph. Rob, if you would click on her tab, you'll see some common practices, but then some that are a little bit different because her focus is on high school. So I just wanted you to have an idea of how we're approaching our lift around goals and guardrails.
Thank you. Keep going.
Then in addition to that,
Any questions about, yeah.
I was just
Member
going to
Mapp.
say, I appreciated seeing this. So is this the dashboard?
this
that
is
you're
our
talking-
dashboard. We're
Okay.
calling our dashboard.
Okay, perfect. I really appreciate seeing this work, just so that we can continue to monitor, right, how it is aligning directly with the goals and the guardrails. That was actually going to be one of my questions that I asked today, so you all are ahead of the game, so.
We were just waiting for the opportunity to share it. So very excited about this. Makes a lot of sense to us, and it's a good driver for our conversations that we have around the work. Thank you.
Other questions or comments from board members? Chairman Craig?
I just wanted to echo Ms. Mapp's point. I think this is a helpful way for us to see the work being done and who's doing the work. But I think the other part to this is that it's putting a more public face to the fact that the work is being done, right? So we are paying attention to, we're working towards getting these goals achieved, that the community said to us were important things for us to be looking at and focus on. And so I think this is really helpful to show the community that we're taking steps towards completing the work that they tasked us with paying attention to.
Thank you. Other comments, questions?
I really like the fact that you have places in there for updates and notes and concerns. I think that's really key, that it's not just the numbers or the results, but there's some explanation around those challenges. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, for some reason, it kind of gives the impression, right or wrong, about more interactive, if you will, more of a dynamic document, certainly. Other comments, questions? Well, thank you for sharing that. Let's keep going.
Awesome. And so what we are going to share with you more specifically and more detail today is a presentation on Goal 1 and interims, Goal 2 and interims, Goal 3 and interims, led by Assistant Superintendent John Chambers.
Good evening, Board President,
Welcome.
Vice President, board members, and Interim Superintendent Murphy. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you tonight. Goal 1, just as a reminder, is addressing the percent of third graders reading proficiency on the state test will increase from 47.5 in June of '23 to 61% in June of '27. And the first interim is looking at the percent of first grade students meeting that criteria will increase from 27.6 to 31% by fall of '24. And if you look at that, that cohort of students, we went from 27.6 to 38.6, and the goal target was 31%. So we've exceeded that goal for our first grade students that were in that cohort in school year '23. Goal 1B is the looking at the percentage of first grade Black students who met the criteria on the iReady reading will increase from 18.9 in fall of '22 to 26% in fall of '24. And that cohort, if you look, it's 18.9. We've increased in fall of '24 to 28.9, which is a 17.7% increase and we've, exceeded that goal as well. Goal 1C, we're looking at that same cohort, but looking at the percentage of Hispanic students meeting the success criteria. In that group, the cohort started at 14.3 in the fall of 22-23, and it is at 14.7 in fall of 24-25. So we did not meet the target goal of 21%. So for goal 1, the key takeaways, we understand that our Hispanic students see the largest increases year over year from fall to winter, but we know they still need some more intensified supports. And even though the focus on this goal was for Black, Hispanic, and multiracial groups, we feel like we still need to monitor and unpack the needs for our special ed and our special education subgroups. So our next steps with this goal is to review the fall third grade OST from the test that we'll be taking this winter and adjust the interventions and enrichment activities based on the students' needs. And we're going to continue to strengthen the Tier 1 curriculum, and we're looking at a balance between word recognition and language composition. And we also know that we need to intensify language acquisitions and best practices and supports for the students.
Do members have any questions or comments regarding Goal 1? Mr. Craig?
So thank you for the presentation. I wanted to maybe ask one question around the Hispanic students number, and I am a little bit thinking in my head that this may also be connected to students who are multilingual as well, and that first grade reading grade may not be always the best measure of where they will potentially be, because we've seen such large growths as they get higher in their readings or in their grade levels. And so I was just wondering if that is maybe also a factor is where we receive our Hispanic students from, maybe coming from a state of being, they're Spanish speaking, may not actually be at that high level either at that point, because they may not have had the same opportunities to learn and be a part of the English transition at that point.
Yeah, we've looked at that, and as well as looking at as the cohort matriculated through the grade levels, there were students added to that cohort that were first-year students, but they came to us in the second or third grade. So as their their performance on the either iReady was factored in to the original cohort. So but we know that where the deficiencies are, and we are providing those those Tier 1 supports for those students to make sure that they meet or exceed the goal.
And then just one other quick thought on that also is just, are we utilizing materials for parents to be able to assist that are also recognizing they may have some English language deficiencies as well? I think one of the things that, Member Mapp and I were at the Council of Great City Schools Conference, and one of the things that was brought up was creating materials that are still the same rigor, but may allow parents who are also multilingual learners to be able to better assist their child with doing their homework and working through problems if there's stuff that is more in their natural language as well. And so I don't know if that's something are exploring or thinking about.
We have looked at, I think we purchased a program, the Magnetic and Phonics for Reading Intervention Program, that is English to Spanish, Spanish to English. So, we, see the need to provide those, some of those services for the parents as well.
Good idea. Vice President?
Yeah, so this is just following off of Board Member Craig a little bit more in terms of with our subgroup of the Hispanic students. When you say intervention, coming from a teacher standpoint, I'm thinking most of it, or the intervention, is it coming from the general teacher? Is it going to be coming from the intervention specialist, or is it going to be coming from the English, the ELL specialist? Where are you all, or what is the goal and plan to ensure that we're going to push these numbers up in terms of giving them that provided intervention?
Looking at the level of English proficiency, the interventions will be given by either the EL or MLL coordinator or the teacher if the language proficiency is there for them. Because we don't want a student to not understand something the first time and then get interventions in something that they didn't understand. So we want to make sure that when those interventions are given, it's given in the the language that the student is proficient in, so we can make them more proficient as they are learning their English journey.
And then what data pieces did you say you're going to utilize? Data pieces, what data pieces will you utilize to ensure, I know that they're doing the iReady, but what pieces of data will you use as the intervention pieces to ensure that they are on target?
I would have to get with our curriculum department. And
I didn't hear you.
I'll get with our curriculum department on the
Okay.
specifics.
Yeah, I'm
and I
curious
will get
about
back
that
with you on
because, as we are providing interventions for our students, I know sometimes they do a 4-week check, a 6-week check, a 9-week check.
Mm-hmm.
What are we doing to ensure that these numbers will, rise up? So I would be curious to hear that. Thank you.
I think Vice President Weinberg is exactly what you said. We're doing that kind of cycling of the interventions and checking in pretty frequently with not only how efficient their reading is, but how much their vocabulary and all the other strands are growing over time.
Thank you.
Jim? Mr. Crossett?
I don't know if it's possible or it would be helpful, just an idea. Would you be able to measure the progress of each cohort within a school to see, and to know a trend? And maybe that's a way to sort of help predict what might be coming. Just a thought.
Mr. Lindy?
Thanks, Ms. Bolton. Thanks, Mr. Chambers. I appreciate the presentation. On the next steps, the second one, continue to strengthen Tier 1 curriculum with a renewed focus on balance between word recognition and language comprehension. Can you just say a little bit more about that for somebody who doesn't spend, or maybe might be watching this and doesn't know a ton about what Tier 1 means, what's the difference between word recognition and language comprehension? Can you just say a little bit more about that?
Tier 1, if you look at Tier 1 supports, they're the classroom teacher, giving the Tier 1 instruction, that initial instruction. So as we want to strengthen the Tier 1, we're looking at making sure that the curriculum is used with fidelity, by the teachers, and making sure that that initial instruction that is given by that classroom and classroom teacher is effectively meeting the needs of the student before they go to a Tier 2 type of situation where that instruction is given either by, it could be additional supports given by reading or math specialists, someone outside of that classroom that is, the initial teacher's instruction. And when we're looking at like word recognition, for our students, we're looking at, basically it's like, are they recognizing the written word, right? Versus they can hear the word, but when they see it, do they recognize that word? Sometimes the students can, will be able to speak the word, but recognizing, particular vocabulary is a weakness. So when they're being asked to read, that becomes a very big issue. Language comprehension, when we are looking at students in their reading, are they understanding and comprehending what they read? Or are they just proficient at reading the words, or do they understand, the particular passage that they, have read? So, we want to, just make, have a clear understanding of, the difference between the two. So as we're, instructing the students, they can have a better understanding of what they're reading and being able to interpret the correct response that is necessary.
Superintendent?
If it's okay, I do want to ask Ms. Campbell to come up because we spent a lot of time digging into the why for where our data is right now. And I think she'll do a really great job explaining where we are and then where we're going to address your questions.
And while she's coming up here, thank you. I probably should have said this, Ms. Chambers, at the beginning. I know we have a group of people from school board school watching the meeting tonight, and I was trying to ask them questions that might be helpful for them. And if I asked a dumb question that they don't need, well, I apologize, everybody.
Oh, no problem.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Just to elaborate on some of the things that Mr. Chambers said about what we mean by strengthening that balance between word rec and language comprehension. This is the crux of science of reading work that we're doing. So students, when they are learning how to read, our brains are not actually set up to learn that print means something about language. And so we have to do approximately a third of our instruction in the primary levels around word recognition, which is phonics instruction. Many people understand that to be phonics instruction. Then we want to make sure that when our students get into 4th through 6th grade, which you're going to see, this is a place where we do really need to get better, that when they are able to read, that they know what they're reading. And that's what language comprehension is. So we really want to make sure that we're spending about a third of our ELA block in the primary level on word rec, and then about 2/3 of the block on language comprehension, and make sure that we also teach science and social studies in the primary grades.
Very helpful. I'll ask one follow-up question.
Sure.
I'm thinking about if you're a district like CPS and we have thousands of classrooms, and you all have looked at the data and you've identified this kind of why, and you have a hypothesis that the thing to do, and I happen to agree with you, is strengthen Tier 1 instruction. How do you do that as a district our size, and how do you know if it's working or not?
That's a great question. So we talked about this a little about a month ago. Our curriculum councils, where we have representatives from all of our schools who can share what's working and what's not working. That's a great portal to understand the needs. And through council and through our lead teachers and things like that, they kept on saying, Foundations is saying that we need to be doing this lesson for this many minutes, but I only have 20 minutes to do my phonics instruction. I only have 70 minutes to do my wit and wisdom lesson, even though in this particular lesson, it's asking me to use 85 minutes. So we've spent a lot of time, and so many of our teachers would share that they didn't know how to distribute their instructional minutes very well. And as a result of that, we built instructional frameworks that gave approximate minutes and how to do that work in our Cincinnati Public Schools context. We have provided a lot of professional development around what dyslexia is, what dyslexia is not. We are in the midst of providing a lot of professional development around the science of reading this year. And in those professional development spaces, we observe a lot of what teachers are currently doing and what teachers need continued support around. We also have identified, like if you look at our schools with greater Hispanic population, for example, we have identified all of those schools as part of our instructional rounds and reviews that we do with assistant superintendents and our deputy superintendent. And we go into classrooms with the school-based team, we make observations with rubrics, and then we action plan from that.
Can I also add, along with the professional development that Emily mentioned, I do want to remind everyone of the instructional rounds we're doing for each school. And then within those formal instructional rounds, we are also encouraging principals to have their daily rounds with real-time feedback for the monitoring and then providing the support.
Thank you.
Member Mapp.
Yes, thank you. So I will partially be building on what Board Member Weinberg has stated, and I believe Board Member Lindy, but I don't remember. But ultimately, if there is a way, a formalized way to maybe write out like what those measures are for the particular intervention that will align with the specific interim goal that we're trying to meet, because I know that we have the dashboard, but I don't know if it clearly spells that out in the manner which says, this is the next step or the intervention that we're going to incorporate, how we're measuring it, what the metric is. So there's that uniformity and that alignment so that we're all still able to track along with a level of cohesion.
I think when you'll see on like a couple of the instructional round examples, the dig in terms of what was seen and what the recommended next steps are, it's written out that way. You may want to see it differently, and we're happy to share that.
Okay.
Can I add? I'd love to add one more thing that is, like, we do have to strengthen Tier 1, but when we get our iReady data and our Cadence data back, we use that data, and our ELA team has put together an evidence-based decision tree. So, for example, a classroom teacher will get their iReady data back in the fall. It's really like a yes, no, yes, my students are on track, go here, begin to enrich. No, they're not yet. How do we use our Acadience data then to determine they're just as a universal screener? Yes, they're on track. No, they're not yet on track. And then we have what's called a developmental spelling assessment, which quickly lets that teacher know this group of children need extra help with consonant vowel consonants, for example, or this group of students needs more help around the E at the end of the word. And it will give them specific what skills those children need to work on, the resources, and within that then, what is the biweekly progress monitoring?
Okay. I do have one final question.
Go ahead.
Do each specific school have particular goals that directly align with the target goals that we're trying to meet as a district?
You
And is
should
that-
find those in the one plan.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments for this one? Thank you. I guess we go on to goal 2.
Goal 2 is looking at the current gap between African American, Hispanic, and multiracial students in the 6th grade compared to white students. And we are looking to shrink that gap from 47.4% in June 23 to 27% in June of 27. And here we're looking at the multiracial students. They've increased from 46% to 54.1%. But that is, a little below our target. So as far as the target, that was not met. And goal 2B is the same criteria looking at Black students. And their target was it should be 25% in fall of 22 to 35% in fall of 24. And if you look at the scores in that cohort, they went from 25% to 29% in fall of 24. And the target goal of 35 was not met. And goal 2C, looking at the same success criteria for our Hispanic students, it should be 18.3% in fall of 2022 to 29% in fall of 24. And that group, that cohort has gone from 18.3 to 18.8, and the target was 29%, so goal 2C was not met. So some of our key takeaways, the skill and knowledge of the students, as we looked, it basically as they get older, that track widens. So, to continue to provide the same type of, interventions, we need to expand that as the students matriculate up to the grade levels. And the data continues to underscore the need to strengthen Tier 1 and those opportunities for foundational skills and/or work recognition. Our next steps is to review the fall third grade OST results this winter and scale and spread the interventions and enrichment to the upper grades. To continue to strengthen Tier 1 curriculum with a renewed focus on word recognition interventions, and then to provide targeted PD using the winter benchmark data to inform semester 2 interventions and enrichment.
Questions, comments? Member Mack?
Yes, thank you. So this is more of a technical question, so I'm looking for clarity. So I noticed that with the written interim goals here, the baseline data is different from what's outlined, and it is reflecting the OST scores and as that baseline data. Can you provide a little bit of insight as to, did we change the interim goal there, or am I missing something?
The number, the baseline number is changed as the, if I'm correct, Jeremy, with the terminology, as how that score changes, that the original 29.6 to 25 on goal 2B. I just want to be clear on the explanation on how that changes over time. Can you come and explain that, Jeremy?
Yeah, because from my understanding, we're measuring based off of the iReady metric or assessment, but the baseline has now incorporated the OST.
Apologies, are you asking the 29.6 versus the 25?
So there are several examples in the Go-To interim data, and so,
Yeah, I believe on both 2B and 2C, the description at the top where it has the 29.6 in fall 235, and likewise on 2C versus the data in the chart. Last year, as these were progressed, the criteria at the top were adjusted when we had real numbers. Originally, they were based on projections. So I believe the original, like the 23.8 was the projection from the very beginning. And over the course of the year, it was updated to the 18.3, which would have been the real number. And the template that was used, I believe, wasn't reflective in this particular pull of the slides, let's say, that matched those up to the updates that were done last year. Apologies.
okay. So if I'm hearing you correctly, once we have received the actual data from the OST testing, that will then replace it as the actual baseline information. Is that what you're saying?
Not exactly, but so essentially only for that first year when we were establishing the baseline, there was a series when they were first established where there was a projection used for the number as to what they thought the first year's baseline would be, and then those were updated in subsequent presentations. I think those updates were just missed in this particular version of the slides.
Okay, I don't know if I'm, let me just kind of give the example. So for Go-To-A, so it's reflecting that for the multiracial student group, that the baseline data in fall was 46%. But if we look at the actual interim goal, it's reflecting that the baseline will increase from 54.2% to 58%. And so looking back at previous goal monitoring reports, the 54.2% was the actual OST score that they finalized for that particular year. So I'm needing clarity on if we've changed the way that the goal is written and established a new baseline because it's not aligning with the previous baseline
So
data.
Board Member Matt, we didn't change the goal, but what might be a little concerning, the goal or the guardrail, what might be a little concerning is the actual goal 2 is written based on the OST. Then, and so I don't know where the projections came from. I just don't know that. But then when you look at this goal 2A, those fourth grade students, 22, 23, is no longer apples to oranges. Now it shifts to trying to be apples to apples. And so I'm not sure of the alignment between this actual goal and then the children that we're monitoring with the 2A. So I understand your confusion. It is confusing, and I'm not sure of the why we chose to write each of these goals the way we did. But I do, so this goal 2 is usually an apples to oranges goal over time, right? It's a different set of 6th graders. Trying to get those 4th graders to exceed this 6th grade goal, I think we should do better than that. However, the goal 2A is around apples to apples, matriculating that cohort through. So there is some lack of clarity about the decision made at that time.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then the other question that I have is just noticing that the data is reflecting that we are off track. And so I know by the time that we ended or received the report in the summer, things were tracking well. So are we seeing maybe the report is reflecting that we're off track because there may have needed to be some remediation or some additional supports? We know that students came back from the summer melt. Like, what are some of the, maybe some contributing factors that you think has helped to, or not helped, but has caused us trending in this direction?
One of the things I want us to remember in terms of summer melt, we did not have a summer school opportunity for young people. That may be a contributing factor to some of this. In some of the other goals, like when we were looking at the Hispanic goal, you'll notice that last fall took a dip in the score, and then this fall it exceeds that dip that we took. So I feel like getting back on the right track, some of those factors.
Other questions, Vice President?
I don't really have a question, I just have more of a comment. So looking at both 2A, 2B, and 2C, yes, of course, we don't ever want to see a not met. I'm just hoping and putting all of the trust in you all, definitely to change this to green and just ensuring that, we are having some issues in the reading area, and we definitely want to correct that. So I am hoping, and I have complete confidence that we can get this up and really make it better, not only for our children, but also for their families as well, in terms of being able to help them and assist them in growing this number up. So I just wanted to add that comment. I don't like seeing a not met, but I'm hoping that we can change that and move forward.
Mr. Craig?
So I just had a real quick comment. I think actually it's a response to Member Mapp's question. When we set the goals up, we set the goals up based on the OST, but we set the interim goals were based on iReady scores. And so I think that's the part also, that the interim goals are reflecting the measure of iReady results as they went along. So ultimately, at the end of the year, we would have an OST number that would be more reflective of the actual goal. So I hope that, I think that may be helpful in understanding if I went back and looked at the goals and interim goals and guardrails that we put together. I think the only other thing I would want to add is just that I think I would be curious to see how this reflects when we get to the spring, to see what those numbers look like, because I think the other part that I think we will have to at some point figure out is just we do see a growth usually throughout the year. We see this improvement. And then, again, as they start on the next level, what is the reasonable amounts that a person should be proficient? If you're 5th grade to 6th grade, you end your 5th grade year to the beginning of your 6th grade year, is there an expectation that there's some level of growth or a standstill, or what are we measuring? Because I think that's the other part that's a little bit hard to measure up against, right? Is that we know a student may be really well done, and yes, there may be some that, some are lost. But, again, where were they at the end of the spring semester, or the end of the spring quarters? And where did they start at the fall quarter? May be also helpful for us to be able to diagnose what is necessary to improve them. So I look forward to seeing the numbers as we keep going along.
Other questions or comments? I just have one on this. How long have we been doing iReady? Anybody know?
Good
In the
question.
Group? Do you know, Emily?
I believe it's 2 years with all of our schools. It's 3 years for 22 schools that we're doing a pilot.
Great, thank you. And then if I recall, and maybe I'm recalling this incorrectly, when we were putting these goals together, I do recall the dialogue among the board and the administration was that this was one of the ones that was going to be one of the hardest to achieve. It's because it goes to the heart of what we do in diverse educational experience. There was even some reticence about putting this one as one of the goals initially, I think because of the complexity of it. So, but thank you. Continue.
One more.
And goal 3, we look at the percentage of first-time Algebra 1 test takers, they're proficient on the Ohio end of the course exam will increase from 30% in June of '23 to 50% by June of '27. And looking at interim goal 3A, which looks at the percentage of all students, will increase from 23.5% to 35% by fall of '24. We've gone from 23.5% with this cohort in sixth grade to 18.1% in the fall of their eighth grade year. And the target was 35%, and so that was not met. But I would like to add a caveat to that. We have several of our eighth grade students who are some of our higher achieving students are not taking the exam with this particular cohort because they have taken accelerated classes in Algebra 1 and/or geometry. So this is not a true cohort as they matriculate up the grade levels. So, but that is no excuse for not meeting the goal. But I just wanted to point out that this wasn't a true cohort year over year. And goal 3B is the the percentage of looking at the percentage of school year '23 seventh grade students meeting the success criteria on the benchmark on the MAP will increase from 25.6 in fall of '22 to 30% of fall of '24. I am happy to say we have gone from 25.2 to 33%, and that is a 17.4% change, and the target goal was 30%. So I'm happy to say that we have exceeded that goal. And goal 3C is the percentage of Black students in that same group with the criteria on the MAP assessment will increase from 13.3 in fall of '22 to 20% by fall of '24. And this group has gone from 13.3 to 20.5, and there was a target of 20%. So we have met that goal as well. So some of our key takeaways, we are seeing gains in Algebra 1, but we still feel the need to strengthen the instruction in our middle grades. And our classroom visits revealed that there is still some inconsistency in the Tier 1 curriculum use. And the data underscores the need for both grade level instruction and interventions. So our next steps is continued focus on our Tier 1 instructional delivery, expand our focused PD to host our first 8th grade math collaborative and grade 6 fraction PD, and support the implementation of learning from our recent Algebra 1 collaborative with a renewed focus on using manipulatives.
Thank you.
And that
Comments,
concludes.
Vice President?
Question. So you said that you all noticed inconsistencies, so I am curious. What did those inconsistencies consist of in terms of the curriculum?
What was just the, as we were doing, the instructional rounds that I participated in, it was just an inconsistency in the teachers using the use of the curriculum and how each teacher, utilized the various portions of the curriculum. Some were using, let's say 75% of the curriculum, and some were using 25%. So as we looked into the various classrooms as we're walking through, it was just inconsistent. And so, part of the feedback that we give is to, monitor the use of the curriculum and ensure that each teacher is using the curriculum. We would like to see, 85 to 100%.
And you may not know the answer to this next question. Did they give reasons of why they weren't using the curriculum? Just curious.
So from our work in our Algebra 1 collaboratives, I think the most insightful part of that was they didn't know what they had access to in regards to differentiation and using manipulatives and making sure we're building procedural fluency from conceptual understanding. And so Dr. Dawn and our math team has done a lot of work around, like, how do you introduce math concepts at the beginning of a unit? How do you do that daily in the lesson? And then how do you bring in manipulatives in the high school space to really understand what we're talking about in the varying functions and all the good stuff that they learn in Algebra 1. And so with our Algebra 1 collaboratives, we've been able to, teachers have been able to experience those varying pieces from the curriculum, and then that has helped them envision then the changes and improvements that they're making in their classrooms.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments from board members? Member Mapp?
Yes, thank you. So along those lines, have we noticed a trend with maybe teachers that are newer that need a little bit more support with implementing the curriculum effectively, or are we seeing just a variety of teachers just needing that additional support?
A variety of teachers. The curriculum that we've adopted is really rigorous and great, and it just is required a lot more professional development to use it well.
Other comments? Mr. Crossan?
Did you find that there's a correlation to more positive outcomes related to the use of the curriculum?
For the record, yes.
I had another question. On the goal 3A, where it really wasn't apples to apples, would you be able to parse out the data from the previous year to make it apples to apples? You'd have a smaller group of students, I guess, but maybe that would be helpful to kind of assess that instead of having it be a statistic that's meaningless?
Superintendent?
So those are the apples. So if you start at fall 22-23, when they were in the 6th grade, last fall when they were in the 7th grade, this fall as 8th graders. So the goal is to get them ready for the Algebra 1 test when they're 9th graders. So those are the apples.
I was confused because I thought there were students that were going on to other programs.
Oh, sorry.
So you're asking, like, take out the students who are now in Algebra 1 in grade 8 and look at their 6th grade? We can look into that.
Is that doable?
Is that possible? Yeah, we can try. Yes, we'll try.
Mr. Craig?
Just a quick thought on this, because, so again, at the conference, I spent a little amount of time talking with some folks about math curriculum, and I think one of the things that has always been a struggle when teaching math is that once you're behind, you are so far behind, and it's so hard to get caught up. And I think that somewhat is reflected in the numbers there, right, that we see, while students are not necessarily, they're growing with each year in some ways, they're still not quite, trying to get them up to speed is a little bit harder to do once you get there, and there's no real, whereas we do with 3rd grade reading, for instance, you're not supposed to progress unless you can achieve at a certain level. We don't really do that with math, right? And so I think that's maybe one of the other struggles and challenges, is that we're also trying to reinforce skills that someone should have learned or could have learned or would have learned at a lower level. And so I'm just curious, as we think about the Algebra 1 component, because it's so connected to graduation, are we seeing things that we can piece from that or parse from that that will tell us, the potential for a student to be successful, because we know that it's such an intricate part of their graduation, your ability to be, be considered for graduation from their sixth grade numbers and those seventh grade numbers. Like, are we seeing that as we get more development, more growth, those students we're seeing better results?
That is a really good question. If we look at our report card, we see gains in Algebra 1. We put a lot of resources in Algebra 1 because of the fact once you get there, if you are 2 to 3 or 4 grade levels behind, we need to catch you up as fast as possible so you can graduate. And that's really why we are interested in scaling and spreading some of that learning down to the middle school, so that those teachers also have a chance to attend collaboratives and learn about what we call low floor, high ceiling tasks to get any child, no matter their understanding of math, whether it's I'm still learning about adding and subtracting versus learning how quadratic functions work. They can all see where they're at, and that's why we have to emphasize manipulatives and conceptual understanding in high school. Procedural fluency comes from conceptual understanding, and when they start to understand how you compose and decompose very friendly numbers like 7 and 10, they start to see how they can compose and decompose in the high school area too. And so if kids come to Cincinnati Public, we're ready to teach you. We just have to collaborate and identify those pieces.
I think the only other thought I had on that, and I appreciate your response on that, because I think that's part of why it's so critical for those folks to use the curriculum materials. And if you're choosing to supplement with additional resources or things that you've observed in the classroom that a student might need or benefit from, that's great. But to supplant the instructional curriculum, I think I'm hearing from you all, would not help in that same way. So I think it's so crucial for us to, and again, I think it's one of the things to Board Member Bolden's point, the last one, this is the thing we talked about when we did the goals, is that if we're giving all this investment into the curriculum, and we're choosing to do this because we've determined that this is the best curriculum for the class, it is ideal, and not necessarily just ideal, it is probably, I think, somewhat directed and somewhat expected that you would use the curriculum and then supplement if necessary, as opposed to supplant with the information that would be different. Thank you.
Yes, I hope Kendra and Ben will allow me, appreciate this question, but we have this topic in the policy committee meeting, and we're kind of working on, it's a work in progress. So do you need to wait for us to come back to the full committee? I'm just trying to understand the process.
No, I'm very glad you raised the issue because there's 2 tracks here coming out of policy, if I recall. One is, at least I remember this when I attended policy 2 meetings ago. I think Member Mapp had introduced a suggestion regarding interim evaluations, not just necessarily for the superintendent particularly, but interim expectations. And then I think there is 1240 or something that is specific to superintendent evaluations. And I know that policy, as I understand it, working on both of those things with, frankly, is my understanding, a higher priority and more fulsome effort on the superintendent policy. we can certainly, if the policy committee would like us to
No,
wait.
Your answer makes sense. I mean, yeah, okay, thank you.
So we can defer to the policy committee if you would like us to wait on it. I just know that it's been brought to the board, and I do know there's been discussion as well about whether or not there should be an interim superintendent evaluation. We did look it up, in the last 2 interim superintendents have not had one, but I remember Member Mapp saying, well, just because we didn't do it before doesn't mean we, should continue that effort. I think it's also, let's be candid, this is all very much a part of some interest by some that should there be, in addition to a treasurer search, should there be a superintendent search? Or when should that happen? So I think all of that kind of folds into this discussion. What I try to do as chair is have you all submit, and you did, some ideas regarding a evaluation for the interim. I also met with this interim superintendent about what her expectations might be, because we've done that before. Our superintendents are, whether they be interim or superintendents, have an opportunity to participate in the development of their evaluation. At least the 17 years I've been here, that's happened. So I know you got a document the last time we met from the superintendent. We also had some members suggest, and I want them to explain and widen our understanding of their suggestions about student outcomes and what have you as being part of whatever would be the evaluation of the interim superintendent. We had a couple board members wonder whether or not we need to have one, not an interim superintendent, but an interim superintendent evaluation. And so the ones that the superintendent worked on with me was the state standards, because that was included as well in the previous superintendents. The last couple have also been about state standards. Mr. Cross had suggested to staff and me that it wouldn't be a bad idea to have a 360 opportunity for the interim superintendent. And so I did reach out to Hamilton County for that effort. They've been using it. And then we also, just through research, board staff found a rather lengthy one right off of the, actually very few, but one right off of the internet. So there's a number of documents in front of us and suggestions. I think there's at least 3 folks that are interested in having, at least my understanding based upon the documents, using state standards. I'm interested in the 360 just because I don't know that we've ever done that before, and I think that's kind of interesting. But my personal opinion on student outcome is that the interim superintendent's been here for a number of months, and I think only 2 of the months has been instructional months, so I wasn't sure whose success or lack of success, how that would, I would like people to explain that to us further if you'd like. So just discussion and open it up for discussion. Again, we're not going to decide something today. I would like us, for the benefit of the interim superintendent and all of us, to maybe decide something, next Monday's meeting. I think it would be good to kind of arrive at some sort of consensus. Because I know that when we're also over the weekend and at our retreat on next Monday too, we're going to come to grips with our treasurer search. So it'd be great to get some of these things on our list and people working hard. So comments, questions, views, or nothing, we can hold it off. Vice President?
Yes, I will be quick with my response. After looking at everyone's suggestions who submitted to myself, and I think they also copied you on it, and it was shared with the board, I am interested a little bit to see more, or to hear a little bit more about the 360. I did look over the document. I'm actually interested to kind of hear a little bit more in terms of why you may have suggested this one. I would actually lean a little bit towards the 360 now that I kind of went through it. I do like it. I like what it's analyzing the superintendent on leadership, problem-solving, communication, professional development of self and others. So I would just want to ask my colleague just to kind of go a little bit further into the 360. Do you know of someone that utilized it before, or, just go a little bit in? But I appreciate you for suggesting this. Thank you so much.
Sure. I don't know if all of these questions would be appropriate. My view of it was to sort of have it be pretty high level and not necessarily specific to tasks or duties. One of the things that I would want to measure is, if possible, trust. I think it's going to be really key that there's a relationship between the principals and the teachers where they trust the interim superintendent for problem solving. I think that's a real key, that if there's some openness and an open door kind of thing, and I've got a problem, help me, that would be one of the 360 things I would want to take a look at, to know that there was a positive work environment that could problem solve. So I'm not necessarily wed to any of these specific questions, but that was the heart of one of the 360 things that I was trying to get at.
Thank you.
Mr. Crossett, could you help me with 360? Is the concept, this 360 piece, is would not only be the board providing? Is that, I should
Yeah,
also be
I
asking Mr.
think-
Craig, because he's very
yeah.
familiar with all of this.
My thought was it would probably be focused on student outcomes, so I was really looking for feedback just from teachers and principals.
Okay.
I don't think it has to go beyond that, because I don't think other staff members or even board members necessarily have such a direct impact on student outcomes.
I'm taking notes because I'm sensing some sort of consensus when you're talking in terms of student outcomes. And Mr. Craig, do more people than us do this?
So generally, the idea in a 360 would be that you would be evaluating from folks who are at the level below, so folks who are direct reports, folks who are at the same level, and then the evaluation would be from the people who are above, the supervisors. This is a little bit of a unique and weird situation in that there is no one that really is at the same level as the interim superintendent. And so in that sense, unless you wanted to have feedback from the treasurer and the chief auditor, but I don't know that necessarily is directly connected, and we don't do that for them.
Well, we're never going to ask legal counsel.
But I do think that's the framing of a 360 evaluation,
Okay,
is that it's
thank you.
the levels below, the level at, and then the level above.
And in my recollection, we've never used it, but I think it sounds interesting. And is it used a lot in the private sector or?
There's different formulas for it. I think it depends on the position, and the high-level positions, especially like when you're looking at CEOs of companies, you don't generally do a 360 because it's a board evaluation as to whether or not you have a job
Gotcha.
still. But you can.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Crossett, and then I'll go over
Yeah, I
here.
think you have to be, my experience with 360s is if you make it too specific, sometimes you get some one-off, really negative feedback that's not all that helpful. So that's why I was thinking keep it at a fairly higher level.
Something to guard against,
Yeah.
okay? Great. Mr. Lindy?
Yeah, I have just a thought on the 360 and then a kind of a broader comment too. On the 360 front, I can remember us chatting about this in years past, and I happen to think it's a nice idea. I think that the reason we didn't want to do it before was concerned about open meeting or open records requests, so that anybody who writes anything in a 360 can be requested and then be public.
Exactly.
And we may decide, great, let's do it. Or we may decide, as we did before, that it becomes so hard to sort what is a trend from what is being cherry-picked for a salacious clickbait article. And I think that happens.
You know it does.
And so I think it is a real challenge, because I think a good leader wants that feedback for exactly the reason you said, Mr. Crossett. I think that's really, really, really important. And so I think the thing I can't figure out and would genuinely welcome suggestions on is how do we create a way to get that feedback without tripping on some of the additional challenges we face as a public organization. So I continue to believe there has to be a way to do that. I just don't know that I've figured it out yet, but I think we could figure out something. I think the other thing I would just throw out I have other thoughts I can share too, but I think I'm unclear on what term we are using for any interim evaluation over what time period. Because I think it's really, it's easier for me to get my head around what good or not good is once we're clear on how long this is.
If I can try to answer that, same issue in my own mind. From a standpoint of we know when it starts, and it was May 22nd of 2024. When it ends, that might have some impact on when we plan on having the evaluation done or not using an evaluation. So we're looking at several months now that the interim superintendent has been here. So it's been through June, July, August, September, and we're getting through October. So we're reaching a 5-month spot, and a couple of those, or half of that time, we were in summer or what have you. So the term would be, do you want to have it at the end of her 5th month, like now, and so we can do it, and then we can continue to have the discussion about as well interim in policy as a more generic policy, or the other policy 1240. You all could be doing that, and we can wait and do it at the end of 6 months, or I mean, whatever. I'm kind of hearing there's some interest in the 360. Mr. Liddy.
Yeah, to me, it feels wacky to decide after the time has passed what we're going to evaluate the person on when there is no ability to change the past. Like a good evaluation, I think you got to set up front what you're going to be evaluated on later on. So and this led me to suggest what I suggested around using goals and guardrails, because at least those had been in place. And so there were some clear targets, direction. But, I think I also had shared, I think that the bigger strategic question for our board is not, I really appreciate how hard our interim superintendent is working, and I genuinely mean that. But rather than figuring out the best way to evaluate that, I think the bigger strategic discussion for us is by what date will we have a permanent superintendent? And let's get clear on that. And then let's look forward to that date. And if we're contractually obligated to do an evaluation for our interim superintendent, I think we should do it for the time period between now and when we expect to have a permanent superintendent in place.
And part of that, your first part of your question, if I can remember back, and what Member Moffett suggested too, that when she asked around the state, so to speak, that we should have created this in that month that we started. And I'm sure the superintendent would have appreciated that, but we did not do that. And there are a number of reasons that we did not do that. And so I would hate to think that now after 5 months, we're not going to be evaluating. I would prefer that we evaluate the interim superintendent on the work that has been done, instead of now say, forget these 5 months, which, as you point out, have been very, very hardworking, and lots of things have happened, and now start on a time for the date as to when we think we might have a permanent superintendent. I'd really like to try to close out, if we could, what we've done so far, because I think we're at a important phase. But I think if we all take some time to think about it, we can talk further on Monday, and we can make more decisions or what have you. Other comments?
So yes.
Member Mapp.
Thank you. So yes, you did introduce this by discussing how in policy we are discussing the interim superintendent policy as well as the superintendent evaluation policy, which are two separate things.
Right.
And the interim superintendent policy discussion didn't come around the evaluation that came out of the contract, correct?
Yes,
Yes.
the council pointed out to us when we were looking at this, especially since we'd not ever done, or at least in recent history, not done an interim superintendent evaluation, in the contract that we all agreed to, that indeed we were supposed to be able by, I think it's September, to have had something to hold the superintendent accountable for. And so there was even even though we signed it in May, we said by September. So I think we were anticipating this kind of, we were basically in an emergency status. Let's face it. We've been in that status for a while. So yes, it's the contract that
Yes.
required it, not practice.
Yeah, so just to be clear, and I thank you for that clarification. So just to be clear, the interim superintendent policy discussion is around future boards moving forward.
Yes.
Right? And so making sure that there's an effective, objective transition policy in place. And then the superintendent evaluation is strengthening that language, and again, making sure that there's alignment and further objectivity in that policy as well. So as it pertains to the contract, I do think that it's worth honoring. I do know that we are out of the time frame in which we anticipated, but one of the main priorities and objectives for the superintendent or interim superintendent is based off of honoring those goals and guardrails and making sure that we're maintaining that progress. And so again, I've always stated that that's what the community is holding us accountable to. And so I think that it's important to make sure that level of accountability is still present. And so I am in favor, and I know we talked about it last time, this was something that was done with the previous superintendent evaluation for Superintendent Wright, where there was the balance of the goals and guardrails and making sure that those things were being honored, as well as the state standards. So I would be more interested in having some collaboration with those two, because I think the state standards, while they are great, I think they are very subjective, or even the 360 can be subjective in scope, but the goals and guardrails give us metrics that we can actually say, okay, this is an objective way of looking at how we're progressing.
Thank you. I think that's very helpful. Mr. Craig?
So just my quick 2 or 3 thoughts here. First off, I think there's an ideal situation for the permanent superintendent that would include a 360. I'm a little concerned with doing it for an interim, and only that, is that something that is then used in the process if we are doing a search? That becomes something that's implemented into that search discussion. And so that was my only really concern with using the 360 for the interim. But I do think, for policy as you're discussing it, it would be lovely to add that in, because I think that is a way for us to measure those criteria, those standards that are offered at the state level, because we do not interact in a lot of the day-to-day business of the district. And I think it's fair for the superintendent to be able to demonstrate through their interactions with their staff how well they are being as a leader, how well they are governing the district, how well they're managing the district in a same sense. So I think the 360 is a great idea. I just am not sure I think it's the best for the interim goals. I do think for our interim goals, for me, or interim measures for the superintendent, I should say, or for the interim superintendent, the evaluation, I do think one of the things that would be maybe helpful to do is to really just iron out what the expectation for the next few months look like, and look at what we've done over these last few months, or these last couple months of schooling, that should be reflected in the numbers that we would get to at a certain point. And so I think maybe the thing that might be helpful, and I don't know if the general counsel knows exactly when we would have to do it by in the contract, because I don't remember what it says in there, but just setting a date. And so this is maybe to Board Member Lindy's point, if we set a date on which we would do an evaluation of the interim, that may also tell us how much can we evaluate. Because, for instance, if we're doing that evaluation in April, we only have a limited amount of information that we'll have at that point to even be able to utilize and to gain to determine whether or not, if our numbers don't come till August, and we're saying we want to hire a superintendent or have a permanent superintendent in that position by May, well, then we're not going to have those numbers, right? So there may be things that we can use from the interim goals and the goals that can be true measures that are aligned with the work that's already being done, that still, again, to Board Member Lindy's point, if we have that set date, if we have that definitive point that we're saying the evaluation for, then it might be able to guide us a little bit better as to what would go into that. And then my third thought is really, I think that also gives the superintendent, interim superintendent Murphy, an opportunity to really state, okay, this is what I can achieve, this is what realistically will happen and can happen over the next few months. And so I don't think it's any more fair to say, we're not going to look at the work you've done, but also it's not more fair to say we're going to add more work to what you will do than what's already kind of been expected of the role. And that's why I think using things like the interim goals as measurables to say, where are we getting reporting on, where are we doing these things on, where are we seeing measurable growth on. So we may not get the same to, I think, Board Member Lindy's point of having the specific numbers. We may not be able to say every single one of those numbers we can hold her accountable to because we may not have that information. But for those that we do have, those that we would have information on, those are things that we would have things on, we should be able to at least make that assessment because we've already been doing that work and that's already the work she's doing. So I think it's still fair to ask of that. But I think the key for me is what's the date we would be looking to do this evaluation on?
Okay. Other comments, questions? Mr. Lindy?
I think I agree with everything Mr. Craig said. And we'll just add, I think that at the very latest, our board needs to be either working with a search firm, or if we're not going to be working with a search firm, we need to have posted the superintendent position and be reviewing applications no later than January. I mean, I think we should have done this months ago. I think it is, I think it's the most important strategic discussion our board should be having. And I think I can't imagine a planet on which we shouldn't be doing that by January. Thank you.
I think we've talked briefly about January over time, and talked also about the end of the school year or its semester break. If I think back many meetings ago, even in the summer, I think those have been some dates that there's been some comfort with, if I recall. How about yes, sir?
I wanted to kind of reiterate what Brandon was talking about, because I think it made a lot of sense. I think if we build some expectations of what interim superintendent for the next few months, but I think also when we build those expectations, I think there's a moment to use that to kind of look back at the last 5 months as a way for the interim superintendent to sort of gauge how it's going. And I think that process could be dual in terms of looking back, how's it going, and what's expected in the future in the next 2, 3, 4 months or whatever. So I think that could be very helpful to everybody to have something like that. There's no reason why the past 5 months can't be looked at to see how it's going.
Of course.
And it could be just a check-in, it doesn't have to have maybe the same teeth that looking forward would have. So I just wanted to reiterate that I think that's a good idea for now.
So we would be looking conceivably at the end of first semester, basically, or before January, or is that what people are talking about? You said January. I always think in terms of semesters. I can't change my brain clock on that. Mr. Craig, and then Matt.
I guess my thought would be, if we're evaluating at the end of January, then it's kind of like a mid-year, which we, realistically didn't do until March or May, actually, quite honestly. For the last time we did a mid-year. I think it's, whatever date is the date we would identify is fine for the evaluation. I think to what Board Member Lindy was talking about was that we would begin the process for looking at either deciding how we're going to do a search or deciding how we're going to determine who would be the permanent superintendent, and kind of make that process decision before January so that we could start at the latest in January for that. I think
Right.
this would be more of, quite honestly, I think if we're doing it in January, that really only gives a small pocket of information that we would be able to evaluate. Okay. And I don't know if we would even have, and that's why I say I think it would be helpful for the superintendent to maybe take some time and think about when would we get data back, even if we were going to utilize any information, because I think if we were talking about January, we won't have the fall data fully done at that point. At least that's my understanding. So like if we're thinking about fall or winter data to be part of that process or be part of that evaluation, then I think we're probably talking about mid-spring. But again, that's not what I don't know based on when we would have that
Okay.
information.
I know we've always had to wait till late summer, early fall to get data, but I'm not sure so that would be the data that you're talking about. You're talking about stuff that we get in the spring, whatever that might be.
Yeah, well, like if we're talking about the fall semester data, when would we have that information? Because I think that also is important to
So
understand.
for example, the fall third grade reading, for example?
Or, I mean, any of the things we would be trying to
Or
evaluate.
or
That's
do
what I
you
mean.
mean,
I
Board
think-
Member Craig, the interims?
Yeah,
You mean more the interims?
because I think we have some of them, but I don't know that we would have all of them or what we would have
For-
in January
yeah.
anyway, so.
For example, right now you have what we did with that first set of iReady data. I'd have to look at the schedule. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, then share that with us, that would be great. Member Mapp, do you have, Mr. Crossett?
Yeah, I think the standards are going to be important in that they somewhat reflect the behaviors that lead to better outcomes. And I think that's the kind of stuff that we can evaluate in the interim is the superintendent exhibiting the behaviors that would drive positive outcomes. I'm an accountant.
You can't help it.
Positive outcomes. So maybe that's something we can evaluate,
Okay.
to just on this, it's somewhat subjective, but at least it's something to determine if things are going in the right direction.
I feel pretty strongly about the fact that we would want to compare ourselves to what the Professional Standards Board has said superintendents are supposed to be like in the state of Ohio, and are we meeting those? And I know we used it for 50 or so % of the previous administration, both Mitchell and also Wright. So I think there's some sense to doing that. That can work. How about if yes, ma'am.
Just a quick question, and I just have a foggy memory. We did not do an interim AMAT, correct? An evaluation?
Or Ronan.
I didn't think so. So I'm still coming back to the original question of, do we need to do one? And I'm open to whatever, but we just need to decide. And we need to keep it moving forward.
Why don't we think about that? Yes, sir.
We have no choice, right? Like, this is what was talked about before. There's
Yes,
a contract,
the
it's
general-
in Shauna's contract.
General
This has come up
counsel can
before.
tell us that I know the responsibility was to fall to the Student Achievement Committee, which does no longer exist, but it was a September date. Can you help us, General Counsel? For us not to do it, we would have to get special dispensation, maybe from the Pope or somebody, I don't know. It's
Contracting partner, the superintendent.
that's right.
The contract provides that there would be, the Student Achievement Committee, which I'm not sure continues to exist, would come up with goals and measures by September 2024. Thereafter, Ms. Murphy, as interim superintendent, shall be evaluated by the board on a quarterly basis or other schedule as mutually determined to review progress toward meeting those goals and objectives. That's what the contract says.
The language gives us some guidance about what we've already gone through. And it also gives us some guidance about moving forward in a quarterly way, it would seem to me. So what if we kind of look at our contract language, thank you, Mr. Lindy and General Counsel, and we try to carve something together, and maybe in a brief part of Saturday during our lunch time, we maybe the vice president and me and anybody else that'd like to help us can come back with something to at least react to. Does that feel good, Mr. Craig?
I would I think that's fine. I would make maybe one recommendation is that maybe what we can do in that meeting and what we would determine is right now we would come up with what we would be, those goals that we would be expecting in the evaluation. And then since we talked about it being a quarterly, looking at maybe the end of the second or end of that third quarter, which I guess is that first quarter of 2025. So like that March, February timeframe allows us to actually see how those things are being implemented based upon what the contract language might say. So, I mean, again, I think that all depends on, truly to me, this all really depends on what information the interim superintendent feels can be provided at that point. 'Cause I think if we're evaluating something and there's nothing there to evaluate, it doesn't benefit her at all either.
Or whose work are we evaluating? I mean, I would not want to be evaluated based upon what somebody else had done or not done. Any
I
other?
was just going to say, I agree strongly with Board Member Craig, and we are able to look at the monitoring calendar. I think that's something that we can have available at the work session, and we can look at what data will be available.
Madam Vice President, do we have enough to proceed to find a consensus?
Yes, we do.
All right. If everybody else and anybody else wants to help us out, we might be calling on you to help us out. I believe that takes care of our agenda this evening. Take a motion to adjourn. So moved.